Okay, so picture this, right? You're in Wichita. It's the late 70s.
Oh boy.
BTK is out there. Everyone's on edge.
Yeah.
And then you become the target of a stalker, someone who knows like all your deepest, darkest secrets.
Uh-huh.
Nightmare.
Total nightmare, absolutely.
And that was actually reality for a woman named Ruth Finley. This is the poet of Wichita.
Yeah. This case, what makes it so fascinating is like we think we know how stalker stories go.
Right.
There's a victim, there's a perpetrator.
Right. Clear cut.
Yeah. But Ruth Finley's case, it kind of flips that script. It makes you question everything.
Exactly, and that's what we're diving into today. We've got some newspaper articles from back then. We've got a People magazine feature from 1980 that really gets into her story,
Oh, wow.
and even some stuff from a book about BTK to give us the backdrop, of what was going on.
Yeah. You can't ignore the BTK killer being there at the same time, right?
Yeah,
It just created this atmosphere of fear. I mean, can you imagine like on top of that, then you become the target of this weird escalating harassment.
seriously, it's almost too much.
Yeah.
Before we even get to the poet, let's go back. There's this really crucial piece of Ruth's past.
Okay.
So 1946, she's 16 years old. She's living in Missouri, and she's brutally attacked, branded with like hot iron. Horrible experience, and something she kept mostly to herself.
Yeah, and that event, that's key. That really sets the stage for everything that happens later. And what's so chilling is there was actually a newspaper article about the attack.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
And that article, it comes back to haunt Ruth in a very, very scary way.
So now let's fast forward 1977.
Okay.
BTK, terrorizing Wichita.
Right.
Ruth's husband, Ed, he's in the hospital. She's home alone for the first time in years.
Oh, wow.
And then she gets this phone call, this just bone-chilling phone call.
Oh, jeez.
And this man, he asks for Ruth Smoke from Fort Scott,
Oh, wow.
her maiden name, her old hometown.
Okay.
So immediately, unsettling.
Yeah.
But then he reads the entire newspaper article about her attack over the phone.
Oh, my gosh.
Think about that.
That's awful.
This trauma she buried, suddenly it's dragged back up. And then, of course, BTK is happening. It's just...
It's terrifying.
And this call, it's the start of the poet's just reign of terror.
Uh-huh.
This man, he threatens to blackmail Ruth. He says he's going to expose her past unless she pays him.
Wow.
And she's terrified. Yeah. But she doesn't tell Ed about the call when he gets home from the hospital.
Oh, so she keeps it to herself.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's a decision that she's going to kind of keep making throughout this.
Right.
You have to wonder, like, what was going through her mind? Is she trying to protect herself, protect Ed, or is it something else?
So it starts with the calls,
Uh-huh.
but then it goes to letters. And these letters, they're strange. They're full of misspelled words, this formal language that just doesn't fit.
Yeah.
And it just gets creepier and creepier.
Right.
Then she gets a black rose delivered. There's an attempted abduction.
Oh, my God.
Each thing just adds another layer of fear,
Yeah.
tension.
It's escalating quickly.
Yeah.
And you got to remember, this is the 70s. Stalking, it wasn't really recognized as a serious crime back then.
Right.
So at first, the police, they don't really take it seriously.
Oh, wow.
But as the harassment gets worse, they commit a lot of resources to the case.
Right.
Stakeouts, undercover officers, even a reward. It becomes a big investigation.
And the whole time, these letters, they keep coming.
Yeah.
And each one is signed with a poem.
Oh, so that's where the poet comes from.
Yeah.
It's the content of the letters is really disturbing. It's this mix of threats and then poetry and the misspellings, the grammar. It just paints this picture of someone who's really troubled, but at the same time, like, they're desperate to be heard.
Yeah.
To express themselves.
And then, November 1978, things really escalate.
Okay.
Ruth's abducted,
Oh, no.
taken off the street, thrown into this, like, beat-up Chevy Bel Air.
Ew.
These two guys, they steal her paycheck, her savings bond, even her safety deposit key.
Jeez.
It's terrifying.
And at this point, I mean, the police, they have to take the poet seriously now.
Right.
I mean, could this be connected to BTK? Is this a copycat? I mean, those fears are real.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Ruth, she manages to escape. She uses, like, her wits and a can of mace.
Oh, wow.
But, I mean, it's a traumatic experience.
Yeah, of course.
The police, they ramp up their efforts. They even go back to Fort Scott, investigate that attack from her teenage years.
Oh, to see if there's any connection.
Right, but they find nothing. And it starts to feel like a puzzle that's missing pieces.
Yeah, they're chasing a ghost.
And this is where things take a really interesting turn.
Okay.
So the new chief of police, Richard Lemanian, he starts digging into the case files.
Huh?
And he notices some odd details.
Okay. Like what?
Like the lack of witnesses
Uh-huh.
and how the harassment seems to shift whenever the police focus on a specific area.
Mm-hmm.
And Lemanian, he starts to think this unthinkable thought.
What's that?
Could Ruth actually be the poet?
What?
It seems crazy.
Yeah, that's wild.
Even to the experienced officers. Why would, like, a regular woman create these terrifying events?
Yeah, why would you do that?
But Lemanian, he's convinced.
Okay.
So he orders 247 surveillance on the Finleys. But this time, they don't know they're being watched.
Sneaky.
And then, slowly, the pieces start to fall into place.
Oh, okay.
Surveillance photos show Ruth mailing letters.
Okay.
And they turn out to be from the poet. The police, they find torn up pieces of letters in her trash. And they match letters sent to Chief Lemanian himself.
Whoa.
And then the final piece, they find a poetry book in Ruth's desk.
Oh, wow.
And the handwriting is almost exactly like the poet's.
Oh, no.
So faced with all this, Ruth, she breaks down. She confesses to everything. The letters, the phone calls, the weird things left at her house, even a stabbing in a mall parking lot.
Wow. So this confession, though, it's not like a typical criminal, like, bragging.
Right.
It's filled with confusion, shame. Like, she doesn't even seem to understand her own actions. She keeps saying, I don't know why I did it. I couldn't stop. And that's where this story, it stops being just a stalker case and it becomes something much more complex.
Yeah.
Much more.
And that is a good place to pause.
Mm.
We've set the scene, but we're going to dive deeper into Ruth's psychology, the reasons behind her actions. All of that is coming up in part 2. So stick with us.
So now it's not about who the poet is. It's about why Ruth, why she became the poet.
Right.
You got to think, the police, everyone's trying to figure this out, this motive. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't for money.
No, it's true. If anything, I mean, what she was doing was putting her and Ed in a bad spot financially, causing them all this stress.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense.
Exactly. So the Wichita police, they made a controversial decision. They decided not to charge her.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, even back then, they could see this wasn't a typical criminal case. It was obvious Ruth was really struggling. And what she was doing, even though it was dangerous, it seemed to be coming from some deep, unresolved issues, psychological pain.
So no jail time.
Nope. Instead, they admitted her to the psychiatric ward at St. Joseph's Hospital.
Wow.
Yeah, and she started years of intensive therapy, just trying to unlock the secrets of her own mind.
And it was during these therapy sessions that, like, the real truth came out.
Yeah, it's heavy. With the help of her therapist, Dr. Andrew Pickens, she uncovers this horrific memory from her childhood. She reveals that when she was just 4 years old, she was repeatedly sexually abused by a neighbor.
That's awful.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
And this explains that red bandana the police found, right?
Oh, yeah, the one in her desk.
Yeah, she remembers her abuser using red bandanas to tie her up.
Wow. And that detail, it's woven into the poet's letters.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and she had no conscious memory of it. It's like our minds, they have this incredible ability to protect us from painful memories. But sometimes those memories, they don't just go away, they resurface in weird ways, like through symbols or even actions. And that's what we see happening with Ruth.
So like her mind created this whole other reality to shield her from this awful thing.
Yeah, exactly. To protect her from something she couldn't handle. And then decades later, all the stress with Ed being sick, the fear with BTK, it's like this dissociative state, it comes back. And the poet is born.
And it's not just some random persona.
No, the poet becomes this outlet for all that buried pain. It expresses itself through those letters, the poems, even sometimes the violence. It's almost like the poet is trying to force the world to see the trauma that Ruth herself couldn't face.
That's both terrifying and really sad. It makes you think about all the stuff people carry around, the ways we try to deal with things that are just too much to remember. What about Ed? I mean, what happened to him during all of this? How did he react to finding out this awful truth about his wife?
It's amazing, actually. Ed, he stood by Ruth through everything. He didn't leave her. He didn't judge her.
Wow.
Yeah. He supported her through the therapy, through all the public attention, through the whole long, painful process of healing. It really says a lot about their relationship, you know, the strength of their love.
That's incredible. And what's even more surprising is how the community reacted. After Ruth shared her story, you know, in a TV interview, explained everything, it was really positive.
Right. It's a huge turning point. It shows that even back then, people were starting to understand mental health more. They were willing to look deeper and see that people are complicated. People connected with Ruth being so honest, so vulnerable. It challenged this whole idea of victim and perpetrator and made people face the fact that human experience is messy
Yeah.
and contradictory.
So the poet of Wichita, this figure who seemed so scary, actually became human because she was so vulnerable.
Yes, exactly. And being human, that's what opened the door to empathy, understanding, even forgiveness. Ruth's story, it reminds us that sometimes those scary behaviors, they don't come from evil. They come from pain, from this desperate need to be seen, to be heard.
It makes you wonder what stories, what pain might be hidden just below the surface of the people we meet every day. What would we find if we could look past our assumptions, past the labels? Something to think about. I mean, it's just incredible that this woman who scared Wichita for years, ended up getting support from the very people she frightened.
It's amazing, isn't it? It really speaks to Ruth as a person, but also to how powerful empathy can be. She shared her story, her vulnerability, and people saw her as a human being who was hurting, not as some monster.
It also makes you think, like, if this happened today with the internet and everything, how different would the investigation be?
Oh, totally. This whole case, they relied on letters, fingerprints, actual pieces of paper.
Right, physical evidence.
Exactly. But today, investigators would have all these digital tools, text messages, emails, internet searches.
So much more information.
Yeah, a whole other level of insight. You could see what someone's thinking, what they're doing.
But is that always good? I mean, wouldn't all that information be overwhelming? You could even get misled. Right.
Absolutely. You have to be careful. With so much information out there, it's more important than ever to think critically. Question what you see. Consider different sides of things.
And I guess the poet of Wichita, that's a pretty good reminder. Right?
Oh, for sure. Things aren't always what they seem. The obvious answer might not be the right one.
So where does this leave us? What can we take away from all this, from diving into the poet of Wichita?
Well, for me, it shows how much trauma matters, how it can affect us for years, decades even, and it shows the power of empathy, how it can help us understand people we might otherwise be afraid of or want to punish.
Yeah, it reminds us that even in seemingly normal lives, there are all these hidden stories, reasons for doing things, twists and turns we don't expect.
Exactly. And if we really listen with open hearts and open minds, who knows what we might find in others and even in ourselves.
Well, this has been quite a journey, uncovering all the secrets of the poet of Wichita.
Yeah, it has.
If you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our future episodes. We'll be exploring more fascinating stories and uncovering hidden connections, all thanks to the information you provide.
And if you want to learn more about this case, we encourage you to check out the original articles, especially the one by Corey Mead on Medium. It's a story that'll stick with you. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep those deep dives coming.